Oh my goodness, you guys, this episode I am so excited for you to listen to. So, my guest on this one is Dr. Alan Katz, who I met a couple of months ago now, who is a network chiropractor out of Atlanta, Georgia. If you don't know what that is, you will after you listen to the show. We talk a lot about energetics and the body and healing and vibration. And he is just a phenomenal human being with so much kindness and awareness to offer. So enjoy this one, and I'll drop his links in the show notes below. Welcome to the Shift Your Vibe to Thrive podcast. My name is Emily Evans Russell, and I'm a single mom, multiple six-figure business owner, and master mindset and energy coach. I created this podcast with two main targets. One, to give you practical tools so that no matter where you are in your life right now, you not only know that things can shift, but you know how to make them greater. And two, to change your frequency so that you become an energetic match for everything you desire. I'm talking your relationships, your finances, your success, all of it. Think of this podcast as your weekly energetic upgrade with a mix of subconscious mind hacks, ways to quantum leap, and consciousness shifts. A place where you learn to sculpt your reality and actually finally truly have the magical life you deserve and one that works for uniquely you. Are you ready to uplevel your reality? I think I hear yes, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. Thank you so much for being here. And now let's go to the show. Well, welcome, Dr. Allen. Thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
Cool. So let's talk about, a lot of people don't know what network chiropractic is and how is it different from other chiropractic. Can you start there and then maybe tell us how you made your journey to it?
Network is a system of analysis and adjustments. It's basically a network of different techniques put together into this system that integrates several chiropractic techniques. We call it chiropractic's greatest hits.
I like that.
Yeah. And so I started out, wanted to go to medical school and worked in a hospital and just didn't feel right. It's a long story, but I wound up going to chiropractic school. When I first saw Network, I was invited my first quarter, and it was totally bizarre to me, with people laughing and crying and going through emotional stuff, and their spines were undulating. And I thought, this is voodoo and it's not for me. And I ran hard and I ran fast. And the moral of the story is 30 years later, I've been practicing it for all that time.
It's so funny that often I've found too, what I resist at first is often something I have a real capacity for, but it seems so foreign or weird when you're first introduced that you kind of head in the other direction sometimes.
Exactly. And what I always say is what you resist persists.
Yep.
And so I didn't look at it again until halfway through chiropractic school, because again, I thought it was voodoo. And a friend of mine blew out a disc, and his chiropractor said, look, there's nothing else you can do. You're going to have surgery. And he was scheduled for surgery on a Monday. The MRI showed a big disc bulge. The orthopedic surgeon said, there's nothing else you can do. You're going to have it taken care of surgically. And so he was scheduled for surgery on Monday. This was the Thursday before. And I said, look, there's a woman in town. She does a technique called Network. I said, I'm not going to call it Network. I said, it's totally bizarre. I've only seen it once, but supposedly she gets phenomenal results. And he's like, look, I don't want to get cut. I'll do anything. So I literally had to carry this guy from his apartment to the car, from the car to her office, and put him on the table. And she cleared him out. And within 40 minutes, he was walking. And I was like, wow, there's a method to this madness, and I got to learn this stuff. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, he was a mess again the next day, but through a series of this kind of adjustment, he never wound up needing the surgery. And so it opened my eyes, and I went to every seminar I could get my hands on after that. And it opened my mind, my consciousness. I went from such a left brain linear background to this right brain creative consciousness and exploration of self and healing. And I've never looked back.
Wow. So I met you, I guess it's been a couple months ago, because some friends had been seeing you for network sessions and they said, this guy's really amazing. Like, check out, he's got some really cool energetic capacities. And I loved when we met with you before the session, you gave a bit of this story and your background. And I'd love you to say a little bit more about, I know you mentioned, and it made me laugh. Well, I grew up Jewish and on the East Coast. So I had two choices, medical school or law school. And so, can you talk about, like you just said, that's a big shift to go from very left brain to really opening up to the world of energy, which, like you said, seemed like voodoo at first, and really now seeing energy as everything. So, can you walk us
Mhm.
through a little bit about that story? Because I think it's really fascinating.
Well, again, being a Jew from Long Island, there's a third. I could have been an accountant, but I was always loved science and people, and medicine was my path. And I didn't know there were alternatives. And I looked into dentistry and podiatry and optometry, and they didn't feel right either. And then I volunteered for a chiropractor, and I saw him take people out of pain using his hands. And the story goes, I saw him take care of a little girl who had already had bladder surgery. She'd been also through all sorts of medical treatments, psychiatry. She was on medications, and her parents were like, "Doc, this is a last resort. We don't know what else to do." And so the chiropractor analyzed her spine and found she was subluxated in an area of the nerves led to the bladder. He adjusted her and sent them home. And they came back a couple of days later with smiles from ear to ear because Jill had her first dry nights in 7 years. And I was like, wow,
Wow.
that's what I'm supposed to do. And so I FedEx my applications out to chiropractic colleges in New York, Atlanta, LA, and Chicago. And being from New York, I want to go to LA. And my folks wanted me to stay in New York and basically compromised, moved down to Atlanta and went to Life University and started in 1989, graduated in 93. And life was great in that it taught a lot of the vitalistic principles, but nothing really about energy per se.
Okay.
But when I started going to network seminars, Donnie Epstein's the developer of this work, I saw him doing things by not even touching the people's bodies. And it blew me away. People were reacting physically to these energetic contacts. And I got so passionate about the work that my parents thought I was in a cult and they wanted to get me deprogrammed. And I said, look, I don't have a problem with therapy, but I want you to meet the guy who developed this work. He's given a seminar in New Jersey and they were living in New York at the time. And they agreed. They went to the seminar and my dad, who's a really smart guy, has degrees in geology, and he called me that night. He said, that man's knowledge of quantum versus mechanical physics was phenomenal. He said, Alan, I saw him do things with my own eyes that if I didn't see, I would never believe. He said, I saw him touch people on one side of the room, and people on the other side of the room started to react. He goes, they're all face down, and there's no way they could have known what he was doing on the other side of the room. He said, look, if you can do half the things that guy can do, you have my blessing.
Wow.
Yeah. He touched my mom's neck and said, you had a deep emotional trauma when you were 9 years old. She goes, yeah, I broke both legs. And he said, no, emotional trauma. And she's like, well, that was the year my parents got divorced, and just blew her away. And then he said, did you have trouble conceiving? And she said, yeah. And he said, was it Stein-Leventhal syndrome? And my dad's jaw dropped to the ground. He looked over at my dad, never even touched him, and said, every one of your problems is due to job-related stress. And he walked away. My parents were like, all right, if you can do half the things that guy can do, you have our blessing. Now, they live in Palm Beach now, and the first stop when they get off the plane is my office. They never don't want to get cleared out. So, shift happens.
I love that term. Yes, shift does happen. And can you talk a bit about, that's fascinating to me because I also have a science background. I was pre-med and also going in that direction because I loved science and people. And can you talk about, I think quantum physics, quantum energy is more talked about these days. Well, it definitely is. What you've seen or how you would explain that to someone of how do you see these changes or how do people have that awareness of an emotional trauma by working with the energetics or touching the body?
Well, people think that the body ends where the skin ends. And I'm like, no. The body expands out from the center. Just you've got a bioenergetic field, you have an electromagnetic field, you have an auric field, whatever you want to call it. I explain it like most people think the sun is 93 million miles away. I say, no, the sun is here. Oh, no. It's been proven that it's 93 million miles away. Well, you get sunburn, don't you? Yeah, but that's from the rays of the sun. Well, if the rays of the sun are here, isn't the sun here? So they go, Okay, that makes a little more sense. And some people have a really small energetic field, and some people have a large energetic field. But the emotional stuff is in that when we put things in the back of our minds, what's the back of your mind but your spine? And things get stored there. In my experience, emotional stress is as detrimental to the spine as the physical stresses. I've had people going through divorce and their spines felt worse than people T-boned by dump trucks. And the body stores emotion if it's not processed. Steve Levine wrote a book called Waking the Tiger, and it explained a lot of this in that how our body stores emotions, not just our brains or our minds. Mind and the body are connected. They're all one. Most people think they're separate entities. And again, in my experience, what happens during a traumatic experience? Physiologically, the eyes dilate, the respiration increases, the heart rate increases, sexual function shuts down, digestion shuts down, large muscle groups fill with blood, and you run or you fight. But what if those aren't an option? Again, in my experience, they freeze. Now, in that freeze response, the psyche leaves the body. Now, where does it go? I don't know, but the lights are on, nobody's home. So take, for example, a child who's been abused. If you ask them about the event, they'll tell you about before the event, they'll tell you about after the event, but the event itself, kind of fuzzy, nobody's home. Well, animals do the same thing. You ever see a deer in the headlights, their eyes are empty. And the car hits them, they don't feel any pain, they're already gone. Now, if the car misses, the difference is they'll do this full body shake, they'll make some sort of sound, and they run back into the woods, trauma is released from the nervous system. I think it's because we have a more developed cerebral cortex. When we reintegrate back in, that trauma plays in the background if it's still going on every minute of every day. And it kind of tunes the nervous system for a new response to stimulus. So you and I hear a car backfire and we go, ooh, but a guy comes back from Iraq and he ducks and covers.
Yep.
He no longer needs that response to that stimulus here. So this kind of work and others help to release that trauma from the nervous system so that they don't have to have the same kind of reaction that they did when they came back from the war.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you explain more with that? How is it? So with chiropractic and network, like you keep referring to the spine. So how is working with the spine and energetically, like in network chiropractic, how does that work to clear the traumas that are stored in the body like that from a freeze moment and to start like kind of closing tabs on those events so they don't keep coming up, like in that great example you just gave? Yeah.
Well, the spine is the nervous system on the surface. And so it tells a story. Different areas of the spine correspond with different emotional traumas. And clearing that energy from those areas of the spine can help people to process through them so that they can let them go. Now, sometimes on the table, people will relive a trauma or they'll laugh or they'll cry or they'll scream. And a lot of the work has been refined to where a lot of the release work takes place in the subconscious, unconscious, or in the dream state. So people tell me after getting worked on that they've had really funky dreams or they've woken up laughing or they've woken up crying, but they wake up the next day just feeling different. And my office used to look like one flew with the cuckoo's nest, like tables full of people just laughing and screaming and crying and flipping and flopping on the floors. But now it's way more serene. Now, occasionally it happens, but a lot of the work is processed in that subconscious, unconscious state, usually during sleep. Now, the thing is, most network chiropractors will try to get them in and out quickly. And I put a lot more input into the nervous system and I let them process in the office because I'd rather them do it there than in traffic or when they get home with their spouses, or it's not uncommon for patients of mine to be on the table for several hours.
That's one of the things I found so different about you. I've had a bit of network just that were often like 20-minute sessions, like you said, maybe 30 minutes. And I was really grateful for that space to unwind naturally. And then by the time I did get in my car to drive home, I was just laughing and all like of just could not believe the energy and the clarity from having that much time and space in that group setting to have everything unravel.
Yeah. And the perfect people show up at the perfect time. which I'm always in awe about. And even if it doesn't feel perfect, there's perfection in the imperfection. It's a really serene environment and very zen. And occasionally people will bring in a baby, and sometimes the babies will cry and scream. And my ego is like, oh no, they're ruining it for the rest of the people in here. And so, like, I'll apologize at the end. And they're like, no, no, no. Each one of them individually will say, no, I needed to hear that. My wife and I were talking about having children, and I didn't know if I could handle that. And it really wasn't that bad. And another woman's like, oh, it reminded me when my children were small, and it really took me back there. And it was beautiful. And so again, there's perfection in the imperfection. And I just try to get out of the way. Because after the first appointment, I don't schedule. And so people will just come in, hop on the table. And again, the perfect people show up at the perfect time. And so I'm in awe of that.
Wow. So, can you talk a little bit about when you say a lot of the processing? So, you work a bit on the body with physical touch, but also a lot in the energetic field. And then, can you speak about, as you're saying, the processing going on in the subconscious and the conscious? Can you explain that to people that are maybe like, what do you mean by that?
Well, we work with the meningeal system, and the meninges is the outer covering of the brain and spinal cord. And they're a fibrous sheath, almost like a cartilaginous sac, that protect the brain and spinal cord. They hold in cerebrospinal fluid. It's also been found they store memories and stresses. They found that there's fibers along the spinal cord that hold on to memories like the cerebral cortex. When you put things in the back of your mind, well, what's the back of your mind but your spine? And things get stored there. I don't know if I said this before, but people tell me all the time, my back is killing me. I'm like, no, you're killing your back. And no one really seems to argue with that. So we store stuff in our bodies. I tell people you got to feel it to heal it. And what is emotion but energy in motion? And static energy becomes dis-ease, and dis-ease over time becomes disease. And so it's really important to feel it, to heal it. I know a lot of us were taught to stuff emotion. Big boys don't cry. Yes, they do, only louder. Right? And so we stuff emotion, and eventually that emotion and that stuffed energy can really get you sick. I mean, in my experience, the mind is powerful enough to get you sick, but it's also powerful enough to get you well. And sometimes you got to release that binding influence of the past and release the energetic blockages that keep you stuck. Repressed emotion eats you up from the inside. And I believe that's what cancer is. And a lot of the physical maladies that manifest physically have an emotional component behind them. So you got to feel it to heal it.
Yeah. And it's interesting that term, feel it to heal it, is used in different ways. One of the things I've found interesting with energetic work, like Network Chiropractic as an example, is that yes, the emotion may come up. Like you said, people laugh or cry or shake, but it seems to resolve without a lot of pain that might be very different from, say, talk therapy. Or if I just yell enough, then it'll get out. Can you talk about what your perspective is on that? Because to me, it seems a very different way of resolving it than when some people hear feel it to heal it, they have a different sense of that.
Well, everybody's unique, and talk therapy can be very powerful. And again, I've gotten more referrals from psychiatrists and psychologists than from orthopedists. The two go hand in hand. I'll bring stuff up for people, and the psychiatrist or psychologist will help them process through it. They'll bring stuff up for people, and the body work that I do will help them process through it. The beautiful thing about the work that I do is you don't even have to know what it is to let it go. You don't have to relive every trauma. You don't have to rehash everything that's ever gone on negatively in your life to move forward. When it's released consciously or unconsciously, it really is beautiful because you don't get caught up in the whys and the victim and the blame game and all that stuff. Now, again, sometimes memories surface, and it's an opportunity for growth or for mending relationships or figuring out the whys. And that's okay too. But we're such unique individuals, and we all need different ways to heal. Now,
Yeah.
again, healing is just to make whole, right?
Yeah.
You know, the root to holistic is whole, to make whole.
I love that. And I love that fluidity of what you're talking about is we are so unique and individual. So everyone's going to have a different path to the whole and that journey. And like you said, you refer some people, they refer back, and it's this beautiful what's working for you at the time when we're all unique. And you said something earlier. I'd love you to talk about the title of this podcast is Shift Your Vibe to Thrive. And you mentioned earlier, like people have different energetic fields. Some are bigger, some are smaller. Can you talk about what can change that? Like, how do we expand and change our frequency? And how can something like network or other possibilities change that? And what does that do for the person?
Well, everything is in vibration. Sound, light, everything has a frequency. And if you can change your internal frequencies, and sometimes it's through my work, and sometimes it's through other types of body work, sometimes it's through music, and sometimes it's through light therapy. We're all, again, so unique, and we all need different things. Yeah, I mean, sunlight or being around like-minded people or meditation. These things will change your frequency. You hear about somebody, oh, I get really bad vibes from that person. Well, they probably have a very low vibration. Or people that are drawn to people have a high vibration. And so you can change your vibration just by breathing, by listening to music, by getting worked on energetically, by going to the beach, doing the things that bring you joy will raise your vibration. And I think that's what we're all trying to do. It's interesting. When I meet with a new patient, I try to match their vibration. I didn't even know I was doing it until years into doing it because if my vibration was too high, then they couldn't hear me. I would have to lower mine to match theirs so that we can have a conversation that they could understand. I don't know how I do it. It's just something that I guess I've always done. And I can tell the same story to the physician and the metaphysician, to the Catholic priest and the voodoo priest. It's the same story, but I just changed the verbs for a better understanding for where they are. Yeah, but everything's vibration. We're vibrating. We're constantly vibrating. Every day I go into my office and I pick music that has a specific frequency. And it's kind of like, why do I pick this frequency? I don't know, but I just did. And look how people are reacting. It's that kind of thing. And so people use tuning forks, and some people use crystal bowls, and these are ancient techniques to help people shift vibration.
Yeah, I love what you said. You're very wonderful with analogies, by the way, that you're speaking, you're saying the same thing to different people, but it might be at a different frequency so they can hear it. Can you speak a bit about, I think there's I don't know if it's a misconception, but like if someone's a lower vibration, that's bad. And you tend to, when you're working with someone, oh, here's the vibration where I can get in and where we can communicate. How do you work with that of it's not, that myth of, well, I don't want to work with them energetically because will it hurt me or will it decrease my vibe? And I can sense from what you're saying, it's very different. Can you speak to that of it's just a way of communicating? It's not one is greater or better than another. It's just a different vibration.
Exactly. People are all different. We're very unique. And some people, in my experience, people who've experienced a lot of trauma have a much lower vibration. People who are joyful have much higher vibration. Now, again, I don't turn people away if they have a low vibration. And there's people that I've never fired a patient, but I've come close. I mean, occasionally there's a patient that I call them oh no's because they walk in the door and you go, oh no. Because they'll try to lower your vibration. Now, the thing is, I've learned techniques over the years to not allow that. And sometimes they're victims and they want to make you a victim. And in the past, I felt my vibration get lower when I go to their table. And I felt my body kind of contract when I go over to their table. And this one woman remember, it was like 25 years ago. I said, if it's so bad here, why do you keep coming back? And she's like, because you're the only one who will listen.
Wow.
And she went home to her alcoholic husband of 25 years and said, it's okay that you drink. I'll never stop loving you. And that was the day he had his last drink. He started going to AA and Then he started to come see me, and I'm like, wow, I was going to fire her. So the people that need you the most are really the people that have these low vibrational energies. So I've still never fired anybody. they, they need you the most.
Wow, that is such a beautiful story of, rather than taking, like you say, needing to fire a patient or taking a point of view, that change you created by just simply listening to her and being an allowance of where she's at, and look at what that changed for her, her husband, and everyone they're interacting with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so last thing, there's a couple last things I want to ask, but one is, so as you made this switch and you opened up to the world of energy and this form of healing and chiropractic, what do you know now is seems so simple about energy and bodies that before would have seemed like totally out there, and you now just is like, this is what is, and I see it all the time?
The miracles have become mundane. Yeah, I see him every day. I had a patient that moved to LA to further his acting career, and he made a movie with Sharon Stone, and he called me up and he goes, I love acting, but I've never seen anybody have as much fun at work as you. He said, I've decided to become a chiropractor. He said, tell me a miracle story. Get me charged. Get me excited. I said, Kyle, miracles have become mundane. I see them every day. I expect them. I've seen disease processes go into remission. My star student, I have a patient who was born in Lebanon, raised in Kuwait, strict Muslim family, just physical, all sorts of trauma as a child, and comes to this country and kisses the ground here every day, loves this country, doesn't understand why people complain here. She's like, you understand, I can drive a car here, and I go to school here, and I can buy a house here, and like, this is the greatest country in the world. And I'm like, well, people don't have that reference point here. That being said, she had no emotional body whatsoever. She couldn't remember laughing or crying since she was about 3 years old.
Wow.
Now, I call it the Adrian principle. Remember Adrian from Rocky?
Yeah.
The movie Rocky? At the beginning, her energy was so small and condensed, and she was working in the pet store, little glasses. And at the end, she's like, Rocky! Right?
Totally. Yeah.
Like that expansion under care, all the trauma started to come up to the surface. And sometimes she would scream so loud the building would shake. And I'm surprised the police didn't come. But this went on for a while. And in that, she kind of took her back to her divine blueprint, where you come in as love, and everything else is just learned. And with the release of all this trauma, like, she drove a black BMW to a dealership, and she said, I can't drive a black car anymore. I need color in my life. And she had every room in her condo painted different colors, and she planted flowers and hair, makeup, clothing, and got to the point where she'd go to her boss's boss and she'd be like, that's not okay. And just completely took her power back. And she literally went from this caterpillar to this butterfly. And I watched this process take place, and her friends don't recognize her. Like, she looks 10 years younger than she did when she walked in the door 5 years ago. She's learned to find joy, and physically, emotionally, spiritually, she's so much more connected and knows herself. And she's not just her career now. She's got friends, and she's got things that she enjoys doing, and that didn't exist. The funny thing, I don't know how long she was under care, but I brushed by her foot and she pulled it back, and she was like, what was that? I said, that's called being ticklish. She's like, I've never felt that before. And when she started to emote, she would cry when she should be laughing and laugh when she should be crying. And it was so, like, incredibly loud, but she had no reference point for it. And again, over time, it's normalized. And now she laughs when she should laugh and cries when she should cry. And just watching this evolution of the self it was just amazing. Talk about miracles. And it's not easy. Healing's not easy. If it was easy, everybody would do it. But to make whole, sometimes you got to dig through the garbage to get to the gold. But it's so worth it. People ask me, how do you watch suffering the way you do? I'm like, because I know behind the suffering is bliss. And once you get through the suffering, life can be blissful. And that's why I do what I do. I see changes in people's lives every day. And I'm in awe of it. I try to get out of the way and let the magic take place.
Thank you for sharing that story. That is so beautiful. That transformation. And like you said, it's probably one of thousands that you have. But that, like you said, beneath the suffering, there's bliss. And even getting access to a bit more of that or a lot of it, every person, the impact that has on our world, on the planet is phenomenal.
Yeah. And again, I always feel like everyone I touch touches other people in some way. I really believe that we're points of light, and then we bring points of light together and become circles of light. And these circles of light come together and become masses of light. And then they shine enough light on the darkness, and the darkness disappears.
Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. Okay, so now I'd like to ask you a few questions that I like asking all of my guests. One for to get your perspective on the energy around things that uplift you, that change your frequency. And I just like to hear people's answers. It gives people more things to play with. So, what is one of the favorite places in the world you've ever visited or traveled to?
I have a real adventurous spirit, and I always like to do things that I've never done. And one of my favorite joys is scuba diving. There's a band I used to listen to called God Lives Underwater. I never understood why they called the band that until I started scuba diving. And just the colors, and it's always changing, and it's always moving, and the shapes and sizes and colors of fish and coral. I don't usually like to go back to the same place I've been because I've been there and there's so many places I haven't been. But the one place that I'd say that I would love to actually go back to was this a place called Holbox, Isla Holbox. It's in Mexico, and it's on the northern tip of the Yucatan Peninsula. And it's this little island that it's like a 3-hour car ride from Cancun, and then there's a ferry over to the island, and there's no cars on the island.
Wow.
And there's all mom and pop hotels, no chains. There's 60 restaurants on this little island, and the water is crystal clear, and you can walk out 500 feet and you're up to your chest and you still see your toes. And from June through November, you can swim with the whale sharks in the wild. And
Oh,
so
goodness.
I took my whole family, and we all did it. And you can't scuba dive, you can only snorkel with them. And being next to this majestic creature, a 30-foot fish that
Yep.
eats krill and will never hurt you. It's just something magical about being in the open water with this creature that is as big as a school bus. And it's one of the few places you can actually do it. And
Wow.
absolutely,
This has been one of my favorite questions to ask people to hear what comes up. And you know what's funny is I leave on Saturday to go to Baja, Mexico with my 2 girls to snorkel with whale sharks because it has also always been on.
Oh,
Yeah, so cross my feet, but it's in an area.
cool.
Yeah, so that's just really funny. That was your that was your place and story.
Cabo?
No, like north of Cabo. I'm
Okay.
not sure exactly where we fly into Cabo and then go somewhere else, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, next question
Beautiful.
is what is there a movie, a book, or a song that really expands your energy, changes your frequency that you just love at the moment, or it's one of your favorites?
Movie, a book, or a song? There was a movie years ago called The Power of One. And I think the quote in the movie was, "The mightiest of waterfalls began with just one drop." And that has always stuck with me. And again, I think that goes back to the whole points of light becoming circles of light, becoming masses of light, and how one person can change the lives of so many, and they can change the lives of so many more. Honestly, I don't remember the movie itself, but I do remember that one quote, and it has stuck with me for many years.
I love that. Well, I see why. And then last one, who is someone that you admire or inspires you, that's inspired you in your life and all that you're creating?
I'd have to say Donnie Epstein, who developed Network Chiropractic, which is now Network Spinal or Network, I don't know, Spinal Analysis. keeps changing names. But he rocked my world and he changed my life. And he opened my eyes to healing and to spirituality and to connection to source. And yeah, he's prophetic. I've seen him do things with my eyes, and I keep learning more and more from him. Yeah, I'd say he's, again, my mentor.
I love that. And
Yeah.
it's amazing. Like you said, you keep learning from him and the universe keeps expanding. There's always more, isn't it? There's always more to learn and space to grow, which I love that. And that's why I really like asking that question. I'll make sure to link to the things you mentioned and for people to find a network chiropractor near them. And we'll link, of course, to where you are. You're in Atlanta. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for this conversation. I feel honored to have had it with you and really lucky to have you on as a guest.
You're so welcome. It was my pleasure.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope you got something out of that episode. If you like this podcast, please share it with someone you know who'd find it useful or interesting, and subscribe so that you can listen to past and upcoming shows.